You know, I've just been thinking a lot about what Don Lemon brought up last week. It really, it struck a nerve with me, and I think with a lot of people too. You saw that segment, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. That question, white men, are you okay? It's like so direct, And it kind of cuts through all the usual noise. What specifically made you think about it again, or what stood out for you?
Well, it's not just the question itself, but the sheer weight of what's happening around us. Every time you turn around, there's another tragedy, and the perpetrators, they often fit a similar profile. It's really hard to ignore the patterns, and Don just laid it out there, bare, really. I mean, he just got straight to the point.
Right, I get that. It feels like we're constantly on this cycle of outrage and then nothing changes. But focusing on the demographic aspect, that's pretty bold. I mean, it's something people usually skirt around, right?
Exactly. And he didn't skirt it at all. He just flat out asked it. And honestly, Brandon, it's a question that, we should all be asking, given the evidence. It's not about blaming. It's about trying to understand what the heck is going on. It's exhausting, frankly, to see the same narratives play out again and again.
So when you talk about the evidence and these patterns, Don mentioned a couple of really disturbing incidents, like the shooting in the Michigan church and then that boat shooting in North Carolina. Can you remind me of the details there? It all kind of blends together after a while, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's awful how easily they do blend. So in Michigan, it was a man who he deliberately drove his pickup truck through the front doors of a Latter-day Saints church, then got out and started shooting at the worshipers inside. And then, get this, he allegedly set the church on fire. 4 people dead. And in North Carolina, another man, he actually pulled up on a boat to a waterfront bar, got out and opened fire on the crowd, killing 3 and wounding 5. I mean, it's just senseless, horrific violence.
Wow, that's just chilling. And the common thread, Don pointed out, that these perpetrators are consistently white men. I mean, that's what makes it so unsettling, right? It's not like random acts, is it?
No, it's absolutely not random, Brandon. That's the core of it. These aren't just, isolated incidents by individuals with mental health issues, though that narrative always gets pushed. These are often radicalized individuals, usually white men, and they're committing these acts in places of worship, in public spaces, just anywhere, really. It's terrifyingly consistent.
And the really frustrating part is the political response, or lack thereof. Don really laid into the Trump administration, the MAGA crowd, and, figures like J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth, accusing them of just race baiting and distracting from the real issue, just blaming black people or immigrants.
Yeah, he really did. He didn't hold back at all. It's almost like they thrive on creating division, right? Always pointing fingers like, look over there, it's Chicago, or it's the undocumented immigrants taking jobs. How do they get away with that so consistently? It's baffling.
They're pros, Brandon. They're absolute pros at it. They understand how to manipulate fear and grievance. Don, he said they were race baiting and scapegoating minorities instead of looking at the actual problem. And it's effective because they keep their base riled up, misinformed, and angry. It's a very calculated strategy, They keep feeding the beast.
So it's not just about winning elections for them. It's almost like they're actively encouraging this anger. What do you think they actually want out of this rhetoric? Is it just power, or is there something deeper?
I think it's absolutely about power and also about maintaining a specific social order. They don't want things to change. They want to preserve a certain vision of America where white men remain at the top. And any threat to that, real or perceived, is met with this aggressive diversionary tactic. It's truly sickening to witness. And then there's the hypocrisy of it all, right? Don, he talked about how these people, they wrap themselves in the flag and call themselves patriots. but then they're actively working against the very principles of unity and progress. It's performative patriotism at its worst, really.
Yeah, that's so true. They wave the flag while like threatening to take back a country they already control. It's almost comical if it weren't so, terrifying. Why do you think they're so unwilling to like admit their own role or just, face the truth?
I think it's denial, plain and simple, and maybe a deep-seated fear of losing control or privilege. If they admit that the problem stems from within their own base, they lose political leverage, they lose votes, and they have to face uncomfortable truths about themselves. Don, he explicitly said, "White men, come get your men." Do you know what I mean? It's calling for accountability where it's desperately needed.
That's rough. And how do you even begin to have a conversation or a constructive dialogue with people who refuse to acknowledge like basic facts? It feels like we're just talking past each other constantly.
It's incredibly difficult. And that's why Don's approach, even if it's jarring for some, I think it's necessary. Sometimes you have to be direct, even blunt, to cut through the layers of denial and deflection. It's not about being polite anymore. It's about being honest about the danger.
So then, beyond identifying the problem, what kind of solutions was Don suggesting? Because it feels like the constant cycle of violence and then the blame game just, it leaves everyone exhausted. What can actually be done?
He called for concrete legislative action, Brandon. Things like banning assault weapons, obviously, given the types of weapons used in so many of these mass shootings. Red flag laws to temporarily remove firearms from individuals deemed a danger to themselves or others. And universal background checks to close loopholes that allow dangerous people to acquire guns easily. These aren't radical ideas. These are common sense measures that, could actually save lives.
Right. And then why do you think there's so much resistance to those specific measures? Because to me, they sound like basic steps to make communities safer, not some kind of like government overreach,
The resistance, I think it comes from a few places. Firstly, from powerful gun lobbies like the NRA, who exert massive influence over politicians. Secondly, from politicians themselves who prioritize their political careers and fear alienating their base. And lastly, from individuals who have bought into the idea that any form of gun control is an infringement on their personal liberties, often fueled by, conspiracy theories and radicalized rhetoric. It's a really toxic mix.
So, even with the data, the consistent patterns, and clear policy recommendations, it still just feels like an uphill battle, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. But Don's message, I think, is that we can't give up. It's about standing up for truth, demanding accountability, and pushing for real change, even when it's hard. He believes we need to fight fire with truth. Not just more anger and division. We have to keep trying.
Don even shared a personal experience he had that weekend at the Ryder Cup. He talked about being insulted by an angry white man while trying to get food, with the man's girlfriend getting in his face. It really just highlighted how pervasive this aggression is. It's not just on the news. It's in our everyday lives.
Yeah, I heard that. That's so wild, It's one thing to talk about it abstractly, but then to actually experience that kind of unprovoked aggression, it really brings it home. How did he react to that in the moment?
He said he gave it right back to him, telling him to get out of my face and that it would be the last person he ever hit in his life. He really he held his ground. But then he also mentioned the irony that the man was like hiding behind his girlfriend. And then get this, they tried to play the victim after provoking him. It's a classic example of that gaslighting behavior we see from that segment of the population.
Unbelievable. So the very people who are like fueling this aggression, they can't even handle it when someone stands up to them. It's quite the contradiction. What do you think that says about the broader societal implications of all this, you know?
It says that this culture of grievance is not just impacting direct victims of violence, but it's creating an environment of fear and aggression for everyone. You know, you can't even go to a golf tournament or a comedy show without worrying about encountering that kind of toxic behavior. It's emotionally exhausting for everyone, really, even for someone like Don, who's used to dealing with public scrutiny. So, looking forward, Brandon, what do you think is the path to actually moving past this epidemic of violence and hatred? Don seemed to emphasize telling the truth, facing facts, and demanding accountability. It's got to be more than just talk, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be more than just talk. And Don was pretty clear, like, white men, wake the F up. It's a direct call to that demographic to like look inward and confront the issues. But what concrete steps do you think are most crucial right now, given everything Don laid out?
I think the absolute first step is what Don did. Call it what it is. Stop pretending it's both sides when the data clearly shows political violence, especially extreme, comes predominantly from the right. We need red flag laws, universal background checks, and an assault weapons ban. And then hold leaders accountable for inciting hate. Just stop it.
So it sounds like it starts with honest conversation, then moves to policy changes and holding leaders accountable for their rhetoric. But then, do you think people are actually ready for that kind of self-reflection? It feels like a really big ask, you know?
It is a big ask, but I think we have to believe that people are capable of growth and change. Don, he ended by saying, "We are boo-boo the fools because we refuse to accept the truth." It's a sobering thought, but it's also a call to action. We can't just stand by and let this country bleed because of political expediency and denial. We gotta fight for a better future for everyone, really. Before we sign off, I've been thinking about something from many years ago. I remember there was a story about two black men driving around the city, randomly shooting both black and white people. But this is not what we've been discussing today.
That's a stark memory, Michael, and it's important to differentiate. Our focus has been on a different but equally disturbing pattern.
Precisely. It was such a shock when those men were captured and everyone saw they were black, because, as a rule, blacks don't randomly do that. But what we are seeing today, the incidents Don Lemon highlighted, that pattern is clearly and purely racially motivated.
So you're drawing a contrast from a past event, yet emphasizing the undeniable racial component in the contemporary acts of violence we've explored.
Exactly. And with that, that's our time for today, everyone. So continue to support, and we'll see y'all later.